So you got a Pacman frog. Congratulations. I love Pacman frogs. They're absolutely fun and incredible. However, I will mention they are also pet rocks. Your Pacman frog's just going to be sitting there all day, every day. In the middle of the night, he's going to move to another spot where he's going to sit there all day, every day. They are legitimately pet rocks, but they look so funny. They almost have like a lot of character, even though they just sit there. And I love them, and a lot of people are just like, oh my god, it's the most boring pet of all time. I love my pet rock, if you will. But let's go ahead and jump right into the care. What size enclosure do you want for a Pacman frog? So for a baby Pacman frog, you can go ahead and use a 10-gallon tank. Some people use critter keepers. I will say I like to use something a little larger, at least minimum 5 gallons for a baby. I'm talking small, tiny. And then like 10 gallons is what I would really recommend for a baby. When they get larger to adult size, I would say minimum 20 gallons so that we have a cool side, hot side if you want to do that. My room is like extremely hot where I keep mine, so it's constantly 85 degrees. So I just have daylight and UVB on them. That's it. I can't put a heat lamp on them. It would be way too hot if I did. But I'm not most people, and we'll talk about that later. So back to enclosures. So if you have a 10-gallon or a 20-gallon, you really want an enclosure that's very deep substrate, like with the possibility of having a deep substrate. So like if you have a 10-gallon tank, you want it to be a 10-gallon tank with no front doors, right? To be able to have like 5 inches of substrate. Why is that? It's because Pacman frogs love to dig. They love to dig in the dirt. In wintertime, they will completely bury themselves, hibernate for the winter, come back out. These guys love to dig, so you need to be able to have access to tons of substrate. Before I said in like a past video that exoterras aren't that great because most exoterras have a really small substrate like barrier. You're only able to have like 4 inches of substrate. Well, I lied. I now use exoterras for my Pacman frogs, and so far it's worked great. I can't believe it. I bit my words. But like I said, anything is possible. Keep growing, keep gaining knowledge. So you can use an exoterra tank if you want to, 20-gallon. That's what I use for my males. A 20-gallon exoterra, I think it's like 24 by 18 by 8. No, 24 by 18 by 12, I think is what it is. The 20-gallon exoterras. Regardless of the inches, it's a 20-gallon exoterra, and I fill up the substrate all the way to the top. And what I do is, to the back of the enclosure, there's the front doors, right? So the front doors are right here, the back of the enclosure is right there. I actually build like a mountain of dirt going up. So that way there's more dirt in the enclosure in the back, and that's where my frogs like to hang out, is the deeper substrate. Like I said, so maybe I was right, but you can do it and it can work. You can also go larger. Some people like to put their Pacman frog females in 40-gallon tanks. That's perfectly fine. A lot of people think that if you put them in too big of an enclosure, it's going to stress them out. No, they live in the wild perfectly fine. Bigger is always better. Just know that if you do go bigger, make sure he can still find his food, and you provide enough cover. If it's just a giant empty enclosure, that's going to be scary. That's going to be stressful because it's just going to be like, I'm in the middle of the open. So you want to have lots of hides and decorations and make sure he feels safe and hidden, because remember, these are animals that get predators come and attack them. I almost couldn't say that. Forgive me. Like predators come and attack them and eat them. So they do like to hide. That's why they bury themselves in substrate. They are predators themselves, but there is a food chain, and we're all somewhere on that food chain. So we got the enclosure size. Let's move on to the substrate. The dirt, that's just a fancy way of saying dirt. Everybody in the reptile hobby, if you're new, that's what they call it, substrate, but it's just the dirt. What kind of dirt can you use? Now, this is gonna upset a lot of Pacman frog people, but I don't like cocoa fiber. Eco Earth, I can't remember the other stuff, Cocoa Core. I honestly hate it. I think it's terrible. I think it's like the worst substrate you can use for tropical terrariums. I literally have a vendetta against Cocoa Core or Cocoa Fiber or Eco Earth. I have never had anything good come out of it. It gets dry too easy. It molds too easy. It stays too wet. It stays too dry. It gets dry too fast. But what you can use is Repti soil. I love Repti soil. I had some over here. But Repti soil or Zilla's jungle mix, those work great. And what I like to do is I like to add a little sand to it. So I'll get Repti sand, and those are safe substrates as well. Repti soil with Repti sand, mix like 25% of the bag with the entire 10-quart bag of Repti soil, and it makes a very nice mix. And this mix can also be bioactive. My tanks are bioactive. I have real plants. You could go to Home Depot, buy a $5 plant, put it in your enclosure, and as long as you have proper lighting, it's going to grow crazy. My plants are literally overtaking the enclosure. I'm going to have to trim them up very soon. You can also go with many other substrates like pre-made bioactive tropical substrates from the Biodude, Josh's Frogs. There's tons of places. But I also make my own substrate. I make my own out of peat moss from Home Depot or Lowe's. Make sure it's just regular peat moss with no artificial like fertilizers, like the Miracle Grow. It has like those little balls in there with like artificial fertilizers. You don't want that, because that, if that breaks and the frog absorbs it, they absorb stuff through their skin. It can harm your frog. You want just organic peat moss with nothing added in there, straight from the wild. That's what you want. And I get that because that's exactly what Reptisoil is. It's just peat moss. So I'll get some peat moss. Sometimes I like to get a little bit of like some mulch, and then I will get play sand. Play sand is extremely cheap. You can get all of what I just said for like 25 bucks, but it's a huge amount of it. I will mention that. And you can make your own. I have a video on that on this channel as well. There's a lot of great substrates, but there is bad substrates you want to stay away from. Substrates like just regular sand. These are not a desert species. Don't want that. Don't use like, I forgot what it's called. Reptibark? Yeah, Reptibark alone. But like I said, they like to dig, and that's not really something they can dig in. Stuff like that you want to stay away from. You want that tropical, natural dirt mix is what you want. So let's move on to decorations. What can you give your Pacman frog to really help that enclosure? Well, honestly, you can add tons of stuff. You can add little hides. You can even make your own hides. You could get branches, all kinds of stuff. I have, for my enclosure, I use plants as like just the decor. It's really up to you how you want to decorate it, but you do want to allow him to have spaces to dig. So I will put plants around the enclosure, and they kind of grow up and they kind of create these little spaces to where he can go and dig, but it's almost like a little tiny forest. And then for hides, I like to use cork bark just because it looks awesome. And you could use other things, but I like to put cork bark pieces around the enclosure for hides. Sometimes they use it and sometimes they don't. It's really up to them. But for decoration, what I would suggest, because these guys like very high humidity, they love it very moist, what I would suggest is get some leaf litter. You could go outside in your backyard to get leaves, as long as there's not like pesticides being sprayed or any poisons. You could also buy leaves if you're too scared. You could buy those online. I have an entire kit in my Amazon storefront. If you click on my Amazon storefront, it'll just say Pacman frog, and you click on that. It'll have everything you need to start like a good Pacman frog enclosure. You could buy it straight from Amazon. But if you're too afraid of outside leaves or outside pieces of wood, because you can just get wood from outside rocks, I like to put rocks in there as well. If you're afraid to just get stuff from the outside, you can just buy it online. But I like to put leaf litter on top of the substrate. If you put it on top of the Reptisoil, it will hold that humidity in fantastic. These enclosures are bioactive. I spray them with water like once every 2 weeks. The leaf litter will sit on top of the substrate. It will just it acts as a blanket, right? It acts as a blanket to keep the humidity in. You don't have to worry about it. It will stay moist and healthy and great, because what happens if you don't have leaf litter on top, it's just pretty much the soil is just open, and all that water is just going to go right out of the cage. So if you have leaf litter on top of that, it's going to really keep that humidity in. And I really recommend using leaf litter because I use it and it works fantastic for my animals. So besides that, you will need a water dish, and you will need a water dish that's big enough for them to go sit in. So maybe if you didn't water it and it's not moist, they can run over there, and if they want water, they could jump in the water and set in it and soak that water up, because these guys do like very high moisture environments and a lot of access to water. Speaking of water, you want to make sure that you don't have like chlorinated water. Sometimes faucet water can be harmful because we put chlorine in the faucet water to clean it, and it can be too much and it can kill your frog. You can treat it by getting some AquaSafe, ReptiSafe, anything that can treat the water to dechlorinate it and make it better. So what I like to do is sometimes I just like to go get spring water. Just spring water at like dollar store. I get it at Walmart now because it was $1 at dollar store. Now it's like $1.05 at Walmart and $1.25 at dollar store. So I go to Walmart, just get $1 gallon of spring water, and I just use that, and I just replace the water in the water bowl. Because if you use bad water with like chemicals in it, that he will absorb that through his skin, and it can be harmful for your Pacman frog. So it's very important to remember, use ReptiSafe, AquaSafe. I'll have it linked in the description on my Amazon storefront if you want to check that out. But yes, make sure your water is safe and not tons filled with chemicals. Now let's get into food. Food-wise, you can honestly feed your Pacman frog tons of insects. There's tons of insects to choose from, but there is some you want to stay away from. We'll get to those. Insects you can feed your Pacman frog are like dubia roaches, crickets, hornworms, red runner roaches, discoid roaches, tons of stuff. You can feed them super worms, mealworms. There is so much that your Pacman frog can eat at a pet store that's available to them. You can also feed them like nightcrawler worms. Locusts or grasshoppers. In the USA, they're harder to get, but in like Europe and stuff, I hear they're like easier to get. Now, for the nightcrawler worms, you could like literally buy this at like Walmart. Make sure it's not like garlic flavor, just regular basic night crawlers. You can get this. And what you want to do with them, if your frog is like really tiny, you can like cut it in half. I know it's a little disturbing, but you can like cut the worm. And then I know it's like messed up, but like cut it into bite-sized pieces and then give it to your little frog, because the frogs are tiny and you don't want them to like, you know, have like, he can't take the worm in, and the worm like overpowers your frog or he chokes, he dies. So this is also a good rule of thumb. But a Pacman frog, when you feed your Pacman frog, you pretty much want to feed it something that can fit in his mouth, right? You don't want to feed it something that's going to be too big. He can't overpower it, he can't eat it. Usually a good thing is like the size of their eyes, like what can fit in, like the length of their eyes, you know, or their mouth. It has to be the size of the mouth where they could get it in just like one bite. That's something that's pretty good. That's like a good size insect for them. So stuff you want to stay away from is like dried insects. The reason that is because it's dehydrated. There's really no nutrients in the dried insect. It's died, it's dehydrated, there's nothing there. Most insects carry all the nutrients in their alive body, all the water, all the moisture. So if you feed your Pacman frog dried insects, it's not gonna be really good for them. You want to stay away from that. Other things to stay away from are things like red wiggler earthworms. You want to stay away from those. They have fluid that produces toxic to a lot of animals. Stay away from the red wigglers. You want to stay away from the goldfish, minnows. For safety reasons, don't feed your Pacman frog fish, because if you don't know anything about it, you want to stay away from those. Also, a lot of people, I see them feed them like beef and pork and chicken. You want to stay away from that as well. Now, this is one, a lot of people sometimes feed their Pacman frogs pinky mice. You might see that in popular videos on there that people are feeding like a Pacman frog, a pinky mice. If you feed a pinky mice, you want to feed that very rarely. And you want to make sure, like I said, it's an appropriate size pinky mouse. You can't feed a big pinky mouse to the frog and he's going to choke and die. It's too big for him, he can't take it in, he's going to have trouble. You want to make sure, and you don't want to feed it very often. You want to feed it like once a month, once every 2 months. That should be like a very rare treat if you do. I have never fed my frogs pinky mice at all. I don't see a need for it, you know, so I never do it. You can if you want to. A lot of people like to, but like I said, it's so fattening because it's just a whole mouse. There's a lot of fat in there. There's a lot for him to take in, a lot to digest. So, like I said, very rare treat. That's like basically eating a whole birthday cake for them. You know what I mean? So keep that as a very rare treat. So we have the food. Now we're gonna have to talk about supplementation and vitamins. It's really good to supplement and dust the crickets and insects that you're gonna feed your Pacman frog, mainly because a lot of times the insects we get from the stores, they've been starving. They've been on the shelf a few days. They had nothing to eat. They might have food in the enclosure, but a lot of times they don't eat it. It's not like the greatest food. It's not filled with good nutrients. So what you can do is you can supplement vitamins on the insect by dusting it. Vitamins you could use is like Reptivite, no D3. However, if you have if you don't have UVB, then yes, go with D3. You can use Reptivite. It's a multivitamin. There's also tons of other multivitamins as well. I have them all linked in my Amazon storefront. But if you use a multivitamin, you can use it once every 2 weeks or once every month, whichever one you want to do. It could be once every 2 weeks. It could be once a month. It just depends on how you feel about your Pacman frog. It can go once a month. It's going to be totally fine. But it's good to supplement this because, like I said, the insects we feed aren't really high in nutrients. They're not in the wild foraging for all the stuff, getting all the nutrients daily. They're in captivity, just fed these little cubes that are just like man-made, you know. So it's good to have that extra supplementation for your frog in captivity. There you go. Now again, you can offer some calcium to promote good bone growth. You can dust this on your insects as well. You can do it like once to 7 days a week if you want to. Now again, if with D3, if you're not using UVB, that's the motto. If you're not using UVB, with D3. If you're using UVB, make sure it's without. But that's the way you do it. Now we can get on to lighting. So with lighting comes temperature and humidity and all that. Now humidity, you do want high humidity. You want like 40% and above at all times. You don't want it to go below 40% because that's getting pretty dry. You want some pretty high humidity. So I like to keep my humidity around like 50 to 80%. You can't go 100%. That's fine too, but just high humidity. You want high humidity. Don't get too worried if it's not too, as long as it looks wet, then you're good. But you can keep your frog in the temperature range of 70 degrees on the cool side and 85 on the hot side. So like that little range. That's why I said 20-gallon longs are great, because you go from 70 to 85. And to achieve this, you can use a heat lamp. Now, Pacman frogs don't like a lot of heat. Like I said, 85 degrees is not that hot. So what you can do is use a extremely low wattage heat bulb, like a halogen. You don't want red light bulbs. You don't want those blue ones. You want like something to mimic the sun, because that's what every animal, including humans, love, is the sun. When I didn't have a hot room like this one right here, what I like to use is a Zilla 25-watt halogen heat lamp, because it's not very powerful. It's pretty low wattage. You can put it on top, creates a nice heated area, but you can also use like a 50-watt lamp on a dimmer, and like this right here is a thermostat. You can put it on there, program it, so that way it doesn't get too hot in the enclosure. You don't want it to get above 85 degrees. If it gets above 85, it can be dangerous. That's too hot. Your frog can die. So as I said, you can set up a dimmer in the enclosure, put the probe in there. This is all tangled up. Put the probe around where that heat lamp is, and once it gets to 85, this right here will shut the heat lamp off. It's great. Also, it'll keep your house from burning down if you're too worried about that, but you need a cool side, you need a hot side, so that way if he wants to warm up, it helps with the digestion of his food. He can go over there, warm up. If he wants to cool down, he can go cool down. Now, you can provide UVB. However, it's been proven that these frogs can be grown without UVB. But again, I think all reptiles, amphibians, even humans benefit from having UVB. So it's good to offer UVB. If you use UVB, I would recommend using the Arcadia Shade Dweller. It's wonderful. It's great. A lot of like coil UVB bulbs are like, they're just wishy-washy. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. It really depends. But something very reliable and always true is the Arcadia Shade Dweller. At 12 inches away, it's gonna be perfect UVB for your frog. So you can use that on top of the enclosure. And remember to put it right next to the halogen heat bulb on the hot side. If you're gonna have it, they need to be right beside each other, because that's gonna be his imitation place of the sun. It's going to be the imitation sun. And so the sun gives off the UVB and the heat. So he needs to know that that's the area he can go get to get his sun, if you will. So these are more nocturnal creatures too, and it's also good to have this lighting, so that way it mimics, like I said, the sun, and he knows like, oh, it's daytime, I need to sleep. And then when you turn those off, it's like, oh, it's nighttime, it's time to hunt, it's time to wake up, it's time to look for food. And a lot of times people are wondering like, why does my Pacman frog not eat? And a lot of times people are feeding their Pacman frog during the day when he is sleeping. And it may look like he's awake, but his little eyelids, if you look at him, they're like really tiny, that his eyes are technically closed. In the middle of the night, if you turned off your lights and you like sit there for like, maybe you go do something and you come back and you like shine a flashlight on, his pupils are just going to be huge because his eyelids are open. He's awake. So his pupils will just be like super huge, hypnotoading out, and that's when he's fully awake. They are nighttime creatures, so don't be worried if he's not eating during the day. You need to feed him at nighttime. Now, feeding wise on the supplementation, people like wonder how many insects do I feed my frog? So, like I said, between their eyes, you can feed your frog 3 to 5 insects. It really depends. A lot of times they'll be fine with just 1 insect, 2 insects. When you get to like 5 insects, that's a lot. 3 insects is what I always go with. And for babies, you can feed that every single day. But up to around like 9 months, when you start to see your frog get like adult size, I will say a year, you can chop that down. You can feed them like every other day, every 2 days you can feed them, because they're already old, they're grown, they hold that fat in very well. And when they're like a year and a half, and they look like they're fully grown, they will get very big, like almost 1.5 years old. I will feed them like once a week, and they will do perfectly fine with that. You don't want to overfeed them and get them really fat. You can feed them twice a week if you wanted to, but I feed mine like once to twice a week, around that way, and they're totally fine. All my Pacman frogs are years old. They're like 3 years old. They're doing perfectly fine. They're healthy, and they can live a very long life. Also remember that you don't want to hold your frog with your hands, just like, your hands, because we have oils. It'll soak into your frog. It might make them sick. You don't want to do that. Wear some like nylon gloves when you handle them, because they do absorb tons of stuff through their skin, and that can be harmful for them. But anyways, that's all I have for this video. I know it was a lot of information for Pacman frog. They're very easy to take care of now that you know. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.